I still remember the exact moment my world came crashing down. It was a bright Tuesday morning, the kind where the sunlight dances through the windows, making everything seem softer and more hopeful. I had just finished my morning coffee and was sorting through the mail when I found it, a crisp white envelope from the university. My heart thudded with excitement. I was expecting confirmation of my scholarship renewal, something that would finally make college feel real. Instead, as I slid my finger along the seal and unfolded the letter, my breath caught in my throat. Dear Miss Emerson, this is a final reminder regarding the overdue payment for your fall semester tuition. I stared at the words, my pulse pounding in my ears. Overdue? That didn't make sense. I had a college fund. Mom had worked so hard to save up for it. Panic tightened my chest as I dropped the letter onto the counter and grabbed my phone. At the bank, I explained the situation to the teller, trying to sound calm even though my hands were shaking. She nodded sympathetically, typing my account number into the computer. Her brow furrowed as she glanced at the screen. I'm sorry, but the balance on this account is 0. The word hit me like a slap. 0. That was impossible. I leaned forward, desperate to understand. That can't be right. There was money in there. My mom saved it for me, for college. She gave me a sympathetic look. The last withdrawal was made 6 months ago. The account was emptied. In 3 separate transactions. My mind spun, trying to process what she was saying. I had been so focused on finals and graduation that I hadn't checked the account for months. I forced a smile, thanked her, and left, the letter crumpled in my hand. Back in my car, I sat there, heart thundering, trying to make sense of it. Then it hit me. Dad. He was the only one who could access the account after Mom passed. I felt a sudden wave of nausea as reality began to settle in. When I got home, I found him in the living room, sprawled on the couch, TV blaring. I stood there for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts. Dad, can we talk? He didn't even look up. What's up, kid? My voice wavered, but I pushed on. The college fund. It's empty. The bank said someone took out all the money. He sighed, finally shifting his gaze to me. His eyes were dull, tired, as if I were an inconvenience. Yeah, I used it. I blinked, not sure I heard him right. You... what? Had some debts to pay off, he said casually, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Gambling stuff. It got bad, you know. Needed the cash. My stomach dropped. But that was my college fund. Mom saved that for me. You knew that. He just shrugged. College isn't that important. You'll figure something else out. Don't be so dramatic. His words felt like splinters, driving deep into my chest. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Dad, that money was my future. You had no right. He cut me off with a glare. Don't start with me. Your mother always spoiled you, made you think the world owed you something. Maybe now you'll learn not to rely on anyone, family or not. Anger and grief tangled in my throat, making it hard to breathe. I stared at him, waiting for some sign of remorse, but his face was blank, cold. I took a shaky breath. You had no right to take that money. He scoffed, waving me off. You should have been smarter. People who think life's fair are idiots. You're dead to me, Emily. I don't need some whiny brat making my life harder. Dead to him. The words hit harder than any punch. I could barely feel my feet beneath me as I backed away, numb with shock. I could hear Mom's voice in my head, always telling me that my dreams mattered, that the future was worth fighting for. I stumbled outside, not even bothering to grab my coat. The cold air bit at my skin, but I barely noticed. I leaned against the side of my car, trying to catch my breath. It felt like someone had carved out my heart and left it bleeding on the pavement. As I stood there, tears finally slipping down my cheeks, I realized something bitter and heartbreaking. Dad never really cared. Not about me, not about Mom's sacrifice, not about the future she had fought so hard to secure for me. And now, it was gone. Just like that. The sun had shifted behind a cloud, leaving the world a little darker. I stayed there, shivering and hollow, feeling like I'd been ripped apart. My phone buzzed, a message from my friend Zoe asking if I was okay. I couldn't even bring myself to respond. My dreams had been taken from me. But more than that, I'd lost the last piece of my family, the illusion that my father would ever be someone I could trust. I always believed in promises. Maybe that was my mistake. My mother had a way of making promises feel like truths etched into stone. I remember how she'd sit me down at our tiny kitchen table, the one with the wobbly leg that she always swore she'd fix but never did. Her hands were always moving, peeling potatoes, folding laundry, fixing a button, and her voice was always gentle, even when the weight of the world pressed down on her shoulders. "You're going to college, Em," she'd say, her eyes bright and full of conviction. "You'll be the first in this family to make it. I'm saving for it, every last penny." I was 12 when she first told me that. She was working 2 jobs at the time, day shifts at the diner and evenings at the factory. Sometimes she'd come home smelling of grease and metal, her hands rough and calloused, but her spirit never seemed to waver. I remember thinking she was made of iron, unbreakable, immortal. But iron rusts, and dreams don't always come true. I was 16 when she died. Car accident. A rainy night, slick roads, a careless driver who walked away without a scratch. The irony didn't escape me. She'd survived so much. Double shifts, bill collectors, even cancer scares, only to be taken by a stranger's reckless decision. After she was gone, I clung to the idea of college like it was my only lifeline. I pored over her savings book, running my fingers over the handwritten notes she had scribbled in the margins. For Em, for her future. And then there was Dad. He was never the same after she passed. Maybe he was broken long before that. But I didn't want to see it. He was like a shadow, slipping in and out of the house, avoiding eye contact, leaving traces of whiskey and cigarette ash in his wake. I told myself he was grieving, that the gambling and the drinking were his way of coping. I didn't want to. Think that maybe it had always been that way. After the funeral, he sat me down in the living room, his eyes rimmed red, his hands shaking slightly. He made me a promise then, swore on my mother's name that her savings were safe, untouched, ready for me when the time came. "I know she wanted this for you, kid," he said, voice thick with something I mistook for sincerity. I won't let her down. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. But as the years passed, cracks began to form in that promise. I'd find crumpled betting slips tucked into coat pockets, notices from the bank about late payments. And sometimes, if I was unlucky, I'd catch him stumbling in the door at dawn, eyes bloodshot and clothes reeking of whiskey. People in town started to talk. Mrs. Hargrove from the bakery would lower her voice when I walked in, whispering to the other women. Behind the counter, at school, whispers floated through the hallways. Rumors about my father's debts, about his poker nights that stretched into mornings. I brushed them off, defended him even when I saw the proof with my own eyes. People don't understand, I told myself. They don't know him like I do, but the signs were always there. I remember the first time he asked to borrow money from me. I was 17, and he came into my room, eyes soft and voice low, asking if I could spot him a little bit from my part-time job. He promised he'd pay me back by the end of the month. I didn't think much of it at the time. It was just $20. But then 20 turned to 50, and 50 turned to 100, and before I knew it, it was just expected. He'd make some excuse about a bad hand at poker or a mix-up with his paycheck, and I'd hand over what I had, ignoring the sick, feeling curling in my stomach. And then there were the nights he'd come to me, eyes bloodshot and desperate, talking about the college fund. "Just a little bit, Em. I swear I'll put it back before you even notice." I'd hesitate, but he'd always press harder, using Mom's memory like a weapon. "You know she'd want me to get back on my feet. I can't do that if I'm drowning, can I?" His voice would crack, and my resolve would crumble. I told myself I was helping him, that I was honoring her by supporting him. It's funny how easily love can be twisted into obligation. I handed him the account book the first time. He withdrew $500. "Just for the mortgage," he promised. "I'll pay it back next month." He never did. The red flags were there, bold and waving right in front of me. But I refused to see them. Couldn't bear to think that he might be lying. Not my dad. Not the man who used to swing me around the living room, laughing as if the world couldn't touch us. But he wasn't that man anymore. Maybe he never was. I kept ignoring the whispers, the concerned looks from friends, the times Mrs. Hargrove would shake her head when I walked past. I ignored it all because I wanted to believe that he could still change, that the promises he made to me and Mom were real. I see now that I was blind. My loyalty to him wasn't love, it was desperation, a refusal to admit that I had no one left. But deep down, beneath the grief and the denial, something else had begun to grow. It started as a flicker, just a spark of something I couldn't quite name. Anger. The day I found out he'd emptied the account, that spark turned into a flame. I wasn't just angry at him. I was angry at myself for believing him, for trusting his words when I should have known better. I think that's the part that hurt the most. Not the money, not the college fund, not even the broken promise. It was the realization that I'd been holding on to a fantasy for years, a version of him that only existed in my mind. And now, with everything gone, I was left with nothing but ashes. I don't know what I expected when I walked up the creaking steps of my father's porch that day. Maybe a glimmer of regret in his eyes. Maybe an apology half formed on his lips. But deep down, I knew better. The porch sagged under my weight, the boards groaning with each step. A rusted wind chime clinked softly in the breeze, its once bright, colors now dull and chipped. I wrapped my coat tighter around me, shielding myself from the chill that seemed to seep from the very bones of the house. I knocked twice, the sound echoing hollowly. A moment later, the door swung open, and there he was, my father. His eyes were bloodshot, his shirt wrinkled and stained with what I could only assume was last night's dinner. He stared at me, unblinking, as if I were a stranger standing on his doorstep. "Emily." He leaned against the doorframe, scratching his stubbled chin. "Didn't expect to see you." I forced my hands to stay still, clasped tightly in front of me. "I want to talk." He raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. "About?" "You know damn well about what," I snapped, surprising even myself with the edge in my voice. He chuckled, actually chuckled, and stepped aside, waving me in. The living room was worse than I remembered. Bottles lined the coffee table, some empty, some half-filled, all surrounded by stacks of old mail and ashtrays overflowing with crushed cigarette butts. The curtains were drawn, casting the room in perpetual twilight. I swallowed the urge to turn and leave. "You want a drink?" he asked, shuffling toward the kitchen. I shook my head, though I knew he wasn't looking. I followed him anyway, my footsteps silent against the threadbare carpet. He poured himself a glass of something amber and bitter-smelling, the liquid sloshing over the rim and onto his hand. He didn't bother wiping it off. I took a deep breath. I want my money back. He stopped mid-sip, glass still pressed to his lips. For a moment, he didn't move, and I wondered if he had even heard me. Then slowly, he lowered the glass and turned to face me. His eyes were sharp, cutting through the haze of liquor and whatever else he'd been drowning in. "Your money?" he repeated, the words stretching out like a bad joke. I clenched my fists. "Yes, my college fund. Mom saved that for me. You know she did." He snorted, leaning back against the counter. "And I used it. It's gone, Emily. Get over it." My vision blurred, and I blinked rapidly to clear it. "You can't just tell me to get over it. That money was my future. You stole it." "Stole it?" He laughed again, loud and unrestrained, the sound bouncing off the grimy walls. "It was in my name. Legally, it's mine." I felt the ground sway beneath me, like I'd taken a step off a cliff and was still waiting to hit the bottom. "How could you do this to me?" I whispered. He shrugged, taking another swig from his glass. "Life's not fair, kid. You should know that by now." Something snapped inside me then. Something brittle and delicate. Something I didn't even know I was holding on to. "You promised me. You promised Mom." Promises. He spat the word out like it was something foul. Promises don't mean anything, Emily. You're too old to be that naive. My mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He watched me, a smug smile stretching across his unshaven face. "You're not even worth it, Emily. You never were." I didn't remember leaving. One moment I was standing there staring at the shell of the man I used to call my father. And the next I was outside, the cold air biting at my cheeks, the wind tearing at my coat. I walked blindly, feet crunching against dead leaves and cracked pavement. I didn't know where I was going. I just walked, my breath coming in ragged bursts, my vision blurred with tears I refused to shed. It wasn't until I reached the corner of 5th and Maple that I stopped. I collapsed onto a bench, my hands trembling, my heart hammering painfully against my ribs. The world felt muted, colors dulled, sounds muffled. I sat there for what felt like hours, just staring at the cracks in the pavement, watching as tiny ants scurried along the lines, carrying bits of dirt and crumbs far bigger than themselves. I envied their purpose. Eventually, I found myself at the local legal aid office, the door heavy and imposing. The receptionist looked up with a kind smile, her hands folded neatly on the desk. "How can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft and understanding. I explained everything. My mother's fund, the withdrawals, my father's debts. I handed her the crumpled papers I had printed out from the bank, my hands shaking so hard that she had to smooth them out on the counter. When I finished, she sighed, her eyes darkening with sympathy. "I'm so sorry," she began, and I already knew what she would say before the words left her mouth. "But because your father was the legal guardian of the account after your mother's death, he had the right to access those funds." The room spun around me. "So, there's nothing I can do?" Her expression softened. "I wish I could tell you otherwise." I left the office feeling hollow, the world around me stretching into shadows. I don't remember the walk back home. I don't remember climbing the stairs to my room. But I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, the only light coming from the sliver of moonlight through the curtains. My mother's jewelry box sat on my dresser, dusty and forgotten. I pulled it onto my lap, fingers tracing the intricate carvings along its surface. When I opened it, the smell of lavender drifted up, soft and familiar. Inside, among the tangled necklaces and old photographs, lay a locket I hadn't seen in years. I opened it gently, revealing a tiny picture of my mother, smiling back at me, her eyes bright and full of hope. Behind the photo, folded and tucked away, was a small note. I unfolded it carefully, the paper thin and delicate. For Emily, for her future. My breath hitched, and I pressed the locket to my chest, eyes closing as I felt the first tear slip down my cheek. I wasn't just mourning the money. I was mourning the lie. The belief that family meant safety, that blood was thicker than water, but bloodstains, and I couldn't wash it out this time. He might have stolen my money. He might have broken my trust. But he wouldn't take my future. Not this time. I remember the sound of the suitcase wheels scraping against the gravel as I dragged it behind me, the weight of it feeling heavier than it should. Maybe it was because I had crammed my whole life into it. Clothes, photographs, a handful of books that still smelled faintly of my mother's perfume. But mostly, I think it was the weight of everything I was leaving behind. My father hadn't bothered to come out and watch me leave. I wasn't surprised. His only goodbye was the flicker of the television through the cracked blinds, the faint hum of a football game, masking whatever chaos raged inside that house. I didn't look back. One. Bus station was practically empty when I arrived. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow on the cracked linoleum floors. I slid my ticket across the counter, and the woman behind the glass barely glanced at me as she stamped it. "You got about 15 minutes, she mumbled, sliding the ticket back under the glass. I found a bench near the window and sank into it, setting my suitcase at my feet. My hands instinctively found the locket around my neck, the cool metal grounding me. I opened it with a flick of my thumb, revealing the tiny photograph of my mother. She was smiling, her eyes bright with hope and promise. For Emily, for her future. I closed it gently, pressing it to my chest. "I'm sorry, Mom," I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. "I couldn't protect it. I couldn't." The words dried up, leaving only silence and the distant hum of the vending machine in the corner. Outside, headlights pierced the darkness, flickering across the walls as the bus pulled up to the curb. I stood, gathering my things, and stepped onto the bus with one last look at the station. There was no one to wave goodbye. The next few months passed in a haze of late-night shifts and borrowed couches. I crashed with friends when I could, slipping through spare bedrooms and sagging sofas, always promising to stay only a few days, never more. I worked at diners, gas stations, wherever they'd take me. My hands grew calloused from scrubbing floors and flipping burgers, but I didn't mind. Hard work was better than feeling nothing at all. I learned to live on less. Food came from dollar menus and discount aisles. Clothes were washed in bathroom sinks, hung to dry in the dim light of wherever I was staying that night. I got used to the feeling of never quite belonging anywhere. But I survived. I held on to that thought every night when I lay awake on a lumpy mattress, counting the tiles on the ceiling, clutching the locket like it was the only piece of my mother left. I'm still here. It was a bookstore. Of all the places I thought I'd end up, that wasn't one of them. I had been wandering the streets, my shoes scuffed and my hair tangled from the wind. The sign was small and barely readable. Evergreen. Books, painted in flaking green letters. A bell jingled softly as I stepped inside, the scent of old paper and cedar wrapping around me like a blanket. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, crammed with books of every size and color. It was chaos. Beautiful, unrestrained chaos. There were stacks of novels piled in corners, rows of dusty hardcovers leaning precariously against each other. I felt like I had stepped into another world. "Can I help you?" I turned to see a woman standing behind the counter, her silver hair tied back in a braid that hung over her shoulder. She looked to be in her late 60s, her eyes sharp but kind. I straightened my jacket, brushing the wrinkles from the sleeves. "I'm just looking," I replied, my voice softer than I intended. She smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Well, You've come to the right place. I wandered the aisles for what felt like hours, running my fingers along the spines, breathing in the scent of dust and ink. It was peaceful. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. When I finally returned to the counter, she was still there, scribbling something in a leather-bound notebook. She glanced up when I approached. "Find what you were looking for?" I hesitated, glancing around. "I'm not sure." She chuckled, sliding the notebook aside. "I'm Evelyn. I own this place." "Emily," I replied, offering a small smile. "You looking for work, Emily?" she asked, her eyes glimmering with something I couldn't quite name. I blinked, stunned. I guess I am." She nodded, as if she had already known the answer. "Good. I've been needing someone to help out around here. Books don't shelve themselves, you know." I stared at her, mouth slightly open. "You don't even know me." She smiled again, softer this time. "Maybe not. But I know someone who's been wandering a bit too long, and it looks like you could use a place to land." I swallowed the lump in my throat, nodding. "I think I could." Evelyn gave me more than just a job. She gave me a home. The apartment above the bookstore was small and cluttered with mismatched furniture, but it was mine. For the first time in months, I slept in a bed that didn't belong to someone else. The days slipped into a routine. I opened the shop each morning, dusted the shelves, and swept the floors. Evelyn taught me how to log inventory, manage finances, and even how to negotiate with suppliers. Her wisdom wasn't forced. It was gentle, threaded into quiet conversations over cups of tea and stacks of returned books. Through Evelyn, I learned about more than just running a business. I learned about independence, about self-reliance. She showed me how to balance a budget, how to set up a savings account, how to protect what was mine. I soaked up her knowledge like a parched desert drinking in rain. I saved every penny, squirreling it away in a jar under my bed, watching as the bills piled up, one by one. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was building something. The idea of my father lingered at the edges of my thoughts, a shadow I couldn't quite shake. But I didn't want revenge. Not anymore. What I wanted was closure. I wanted to be able to look him in the eye and know that he had no power over me. I wanted to be whole again. There's a certain kind of magic in starting over. It's quiet and unassuming. Small victories that pile up one by one until you look back and realize you've built something. That was how it began for me. Working at Evergreen Books was more than a job. It was salvation. Evelyn became my anchor, guiding me through the intricacies of business and life with a patience I'd never known. Every morning, I would unlock the heavy wooden doors, flip the sign from closed to open, and breathe in the scent of old paper and cedar. It was the smell of possibilities. Evelyn was a force of nature. Sharp-eyed and quick-witted, she handled the shop like a captain steering a ship through a storm. I watched her negotiate with suppliers, balance the books, and organize community events with a grace I only dreamed of possessing. She never once doubted my ability to learn. "You're stronger than you think, Emily," she'd say, her eyes bright with conviction. And for the first time, I believed her. When she offered to pay for my night classes, I almost said no. It felt too generous, too much. But she wouldn't hear of it. "Think of it as an investment," she'd insisted, waving off my protests. "You've got a good head for business. Let's sharpen it." The first night I walked into that classroom, my hands trembled slightly as I found my seat. The room smelled of chalk dust and freshly sharpened pencils. I was surrounded by strangers, some younger than me, some older, all chasing their own versions of redemption. I sat up straight, pen poised over my notebook, and absorbed everything. Finance, marketing, entrepreneurship. I drank it in, every bit of it. Concepts that once seemed foreign and unattainable now felt like second nature. I poured my soul into the coursework, driven by something bigger than ambition, something far deeper. Months slipped into years, and I earned my degree quietly, with no fanfare. Evelyn and I celebrated with champagne in chipped coffee mugs, laughing as the bubbles fizzed and popped. By then, Evergreen Books wasn't just a shop anymore. It had grown into a community hub. Together, we expanded, adding a small cafe, a reading room, and a children's corner. On the weekends, I hosted financial literacy workshops. Evelyn said it was my idea, but I knew she'd planted the seed long ago. I taught young women how to open savings accounts, manage credit, and secure their futures without relying on anyone else. Each time I watched them nod along, taking notes. I saw a version of myself, lost, desperate, searching for answers. I couldn't save them all, but I could show them the way. It was during one of those workshops that I saw him. Mr. Leonard, an old family friend who used to visit for Sunday dinners when my mother was alive. His hair had thinned, and his face had grown weathered, but his eyes still held that same glimmer of kindness. He approached me after the session, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. "I almost didn't recognize you," he said, his voice warm and familiar. I smiled, shaking his hand. "It's been a long time." We chatted for a while, small talk mostly, but then his expression grew somber. "I saw your father a few weeks ago," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "He's not doing too well." I stiffened. I hadn't heard anything about him in years, hadn't asked. I liked it that way. "What do you mean?" Mr. Leonard rubbed the back of his neck. "He's been losing big, cards mostly. Drinking heavier than I've ever seen. He's in a lot of trouble." I forced my hands to stay still at my sides. "That's unfortunate." He looked at me with pity, and I hated it. I didn't want his sympathy. I didn't want anyone's. "You know him. He's been trying to sell the house. Heard he's taken out more loans than he can pay back." He paused, lowering his voice even further. "I even heard he's been gambling with money he doesn't have." A spark ignited in my chest. A tiny flicker of light that slowly spread warmth to my fingertips. I swallowed hard, nodding politely, as Mr. Leonard bid me goodbye, his footsteps echoing through the empty shop as he left. When he was gone, I locked the door behind him and leaned against the glass, my heart thundering in my chest. The idea sprouted in my mind like a seed cracking open beneath the soil, tendrils curling outward, stretching toward the sun. I grabbed my coat, locking up Evergreen Books, and marched to the local records office. Evelyn found me later, hunched over the counter, poring over stacks of documents. She didn't ask questions. She just set a cup of coffee next to me and pulled up a chair. For days, I sifted through files and records, tracing the web of loans and debts my father had left in his wake. I found more than I expected. It wasn't just the house. He'd leveraged everything he could: personal loans, payday advances, and accounts that were hidden under shell companies. I gathered proof, stacks of it: bank statements, contracts, overdue notices. I filed them neatly into manila folders, labeling each one with precision. "Are you going to confront him?" Evelyn asked one evening, her voice soft and deliberate. Stared at the folder in my hands, the weight of it heavy against my palms. "Not yet." Her eyes met mine, sharp and calculating. "You want justice." I met her gaze, unflinching. "I want closure." It took months of planning, strategizing, building connections, gathering allies. I reached out to people I never thought I'd call again. Old neighbors, friends of my mother, community leaders who knew him back when he wasn't just a whisper of a man. Evelyn helped me, her hands steady, her mind sharp. She became my partner, my mentor, and in many ways, my family. I stood straighter. I spoke with confidence. I no longer flinched when someone mentioned his name. My father's shadow had shrunk, diminished to the size of a distant memory. And then, when I was ready, I waited. I waited for him to make the first move. For him to realize that the net was closing in, that everything he had hidden away was about to come spilling out. Evelyn found me standing in the middle of the bookstore one evening, stacks of papers spread out across the counter. "You know what you're doing?" she asked, her eyes glimmering with something that looked almost like pride. I glanced up, the locket around my neck catching the light. I nodded. "I do." She smiled, slow and steady. "Good, because the world doesn't give second chances, Emily. You take what's yours. No one's going to hand it to you." I closed the folder, locking it shut. "I know. And I'm ready." I pulled up to the house just as the first drops of rain began to fall, pattering softly against the windshield. The engine hummed beneath, my fingertips vibrating through my palms as I sat there, staring at the decaying structure that I'd once called home. The paint was peeling in long, curling strips, revealing raw wood beneath. The roof sagged in places, and the gutters hung like broken limbs. I killed the engine, the silence crashing over me like a wave. My fingers grazed the edge of the manila folder that rested on the passenger seat, its contents neatly organized, labeled with precision. Debts, accounts, withdrawals. I hadn't been back here in years. I had promised myself I never would. But this wasn't a visit. This was business. The door groaned when I pushed it open, and the rain greeted me with sharp, stinging droplets. I slid the folder under my arm, pulling my coat tighter around me as I walked up the path, weeds clutching at my ankles like desperate fingers. I raised my fist to knock but stopped. Instead, I reached for the doorknob and turned. It gave way easily, swinging inward with a creak that splintered the silence. I stepped inside, my heels clicking against the warped floorboards. The smell hit me first. Stale cigarettes, whiskey, and the sharp tang of mildew. My father was hunched over the kitchen table, a deck of cards spread before him like a hand of fate. His fingers shook slightly as he rearranged the cards, pausing only when he noticed me standing in the doorway. He looked up, his eyes bleary and rimmed red. "Emily?" His voice was rough, the syllables slurring together. He leaned back in, his chair, a cigarette dangling from his fingertips. "Didn't expect to see you here." I stepped forward, closing the door behind me. The sound was final, echoing through the hollow space that used to be filled with warmth and laughter. Or maybe that was just a lie I told myself. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Want to sit?" I was just about to pour myself a drink. I didn't move. My hands tightened around the folder. "I'm not staying long." He shrugged, leaning back, his lips curling into something like a smile. "Figures. You always were good at running away." I ignored the sting of his words, setting the folder down on the table with a soft thud. His eyes flicked to it, curiosity bleeding through his drunken haze. "What's that?" I took a breath, steadying my voice. "These are your debts. All of them?" I flipped the folder open, spreading the documents across the table one by one. The loans, the gambling slips, the withdrawal records from my college fund. His eyes narrowed, darting back and forth over the papers. He picked one up, his fingers smudging the ink, and squinted at the numbers. "What are you trying to prove?" I leaned forward, my palms pressing into the surface of the table. "I'm proving that you stole from me, that you drained everything Mom worked for, and now you're drowning in debts you can't pay." Let out a low chuckle, tossing the paper back onto the pile. "You think I'm scared of some paperwork? What are you gonna do, Emily? Sue me?" I didn't blink. "That's exactly what I'm going to do." The smile slipped from his face, replaced with something darker, more jagged. "You wouldn't." I would. I straightened, crossing my arms over my chest. You've been borrowing money under false pretenses, taking out loans on property you don't even own. This isn't just theft, it's fraud. He slammed his hand down on the table, making the cards jump. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, but I do. I reached into the folder and pulled out the final document, sliding it across the table. This is an affidavit from the bank, confirming the withdrawals from my fund, in your name, with your signature. His eyes flickered over the paper, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly. I watched him crumble, the weight of his own actions pressing down on him like a physical force. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a whisper. You have two choices. You can sign over what's left of the house, give me back what you took from me, or... I pressed charges. He looked up at me, his eyes glassy with disbelief. You wouldn't do that to your own father. I stared at him, unflinching. You're not my father. You're just a man who stole from me. The silence that followed was suffocating. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time he looked old, fragile. His hand shook as he reached for the pen I'd laid beside the documents. He signed his name slowly, deliberately, the ink smudging under the weight of his hand. When he finished, he pushed the paper back toward me, his eyes fixed on the edge of the table. You win, he whispered, the words barely audible. I gathered the papers, slipping them back into the folder with careful precision. When I straightened, I reached for my mother's locket, unclasping it from my neck. I set it on the table in front of him. He looked at it, his brow furrowing. What's this? I met his gaze, unflinching. You took my future, but you don't own my fate. His eyes flickered with something. Regret, maybe. Or maybe it was just a flicker of light caught in his whiskey-glazed stare. Either way, I didn't wait for him to speak. I turned, the heels of my boots clicking sharply against the floor, the rain still pattering against the roof. When I stepped outside, the air was sharp and clean, the rain washing away the dust and decay that clung to the house. I took a breath, filling my lungs with something that tasted like freedom. Evelyn's car was parked at the curb, the engine humming softly. She rolled down the window, her eyes meeting mine with a question. I held up the folder, my smile soft, but sure. It's done. She smiled back, her hands firm on the steering wheel. Get in. I did, sinking into the passenger seat, letting the warmth from the heater seep into my bones. As she pulled away from the curb, I glanced back one last time. The house stood small and broken against the gray sky, the front door still slightly ajar, flapping in the wind. I turned away. I didn't need to see it anymore. I was done with ghosts. Evelyn reached over, her hand resting on mine. You did. Good kid. I squeezed her hand back, my eyes locked on the horizon as the rain softened to a drizzle. I know. And for the first time in my life, I felt whole.